Welcome to AlexGs Aquarium, everybody. Today I've got another update on the aquarium system. I want to talk about the fish, coral, and inverts in the 4,200 gallon display, along with all the algae. Oh, so much algae. But there's a lot going on in the display tank I really want to share. I also want to talk about combining the 4,200 gallon display with a 2,100 gallon fish room, which has been completed. Everything is now one system that's over 6,300 gallons in capacity, and I'll update what's going on in the fish room. And then I want to talk about new hardware that I've added to the display tank, primarily lighting and flow pumps. I want to go through a bit of my maintenance routine that I've been taking on for this aquarium, and some new arrivals that'll be coming soon to the aquarium, and talk about some of the next steps. Well, let's start by talking about how the fish are doing in the first third of the display aquarium. This is, of course, the fish only section of the tank. There is a divider that prevents these fish from getting into the reef. And I've added a few new fish since my last update. I have added in my purple tang, my regal angel, my foxface, and my checkerboard wrasse. All were fish that were housed in the fish room system, and I thought it was a great time to get these fish added in after I combined everything together. I was a little hesitant about adding the checkerboard wrasse in with the Spanish hog and the puffer. That's because he's a little bit smaller, and being the first fish in that size range, I wasn't sure if they were going to be accepting of this checkerboard wrasse or if they were going to try to turn him into a meal. In any case, it's all worked out good. The fish have all been getting along great. They've actually been doing a really good job at just kind of keeping the algae kind of trimmed down in the tank, which is really nice in this third of the tank compared to the reef. Now, I did have one close call. My Spanish hog that I've had for over 6 years decided after I did one of my glass cleanings that it really did not like its reflection. And I really didn't think much of this. I've seen this behavior the whole time I've been keeping aquariums. Times when you freshly clean the glass, the fish tend to really get excited about their reflection. And it happened to be a day or two after I cleaned the glass and fed the fish, and I always kind of mentally do a count or visual check of my fish just to go, okay, do I see everybody here? And as I fed the fish, I'm like, where is my Spanish hog? And I was like, that's really weird. Like, that fish eats like a pig. Where is it? So I look around the tank. I walked all the way around. I didn't see it. I opened up the top. I started looking on top of the polycarbonate covers and the edges of the tank. And I looked down at the far end of the tank, 12 feet from here on this side, and I saw the fish. And I ran over, I opened that part of the top, and it was on top of the polycarbonate cover, although it had gone ajar a bit. And so the weight of the fish was actually putting it into the water slightly, so the fish's head was in the water and the rest of its body was out. I don't know how long the fish was there. It was breathing, and luckily I just dumped the fish back into the tank off the top, and it started swimming around again. I have to say, though, that Spanish hog looked really rough for about a week. It's definitely lost some scales. There was swelling. It had redness to it. I was actually worried that a bad bacterial infection or something might set in. And, after about a week, the fish started to improve in its look. It never lost its appetite or anything. And I haven't cleaned the glass again yet, but I would have noticed that the fish is not going after its reflection anymore. We'll see if that stays the case. That was my one close call with the fish in here. Other than that, everyone's getting along good. They're all eating well, and I'm very happy with the progress of the fish in the fish only section of the tank. The reef aquarium is doing really well, and I've been very happy with the progress that's happening with this tank. And the fish are all doing well. I've got my 2 bar gobies and my flame hawk. I've gone ahead, I added a Talbot's damsel, a Royal Brahma, my Bangai cardinal. Those are all fish that were in the fish room system, and I've just gone ahead and moved them over here. And just to add a few more fish in here. I know it's not much in this massive section of tank, but it's nice to see a little bit more movement in here. I added a second cleaner shrimp into the tank, so now my cleaner shrimps have paired up, and it's funny because they actually selected a place right down here up against the glass where they sit all day long. At night they go around, but during the day, that's their little area there, which doesn't make sense to me with all the aquascape, but hey, if they're happy, I'm happy. I've also added a couple of coral banded shrimp into the tank. I have not kept these shrimp in probably 20 years, and I've always loved them. I did just buy two and see if they pair, and of course they completely separated out. It's okay though, it's such a massive tank. I don't worry about it. There's plenty of room for everybody. Nobody's showing any signs of aggression or attacking one another in the shrimp community, so they're good. My one conch that I have in the tank is doing well, and of course cleanup crew has been my primary focus in here, and I have been adding to that slowly, and just this week I added a lot of snails. But right now the cleanup crew consists of 8 pincushion urchins, 2 long spine urchins. Now there's a third long spine urchin I didn't mention. It's in the fish only section of the tank, and really I had some Blackfoot trochus, just a dozen of them in here, which I know it's a laughably small amount, but I just went ahead and added in 75 snails, 25 white trochus, and 50 of the Mexican turbo snails. Now I tend to add cleanup crew a little slower in tanks, and of course you can see there is a lot of hair algae in here. I mean a lot. I went in and I siphoned out 10 gallons of water in this section of tank alone a little earlier this week, and I pulled out a softball sized clump of hair algae. So I'm at the point now where I'm going to do some manual removal of the algae, but I also want to let the urchins and the snails start to do their job. I've also been pulling stomella snails out of my other tanks. I got about 4 different species of stomella, and I've been just pulling them out and seeding them in here now that there's plenty to eat. I'm also starting to see those snails more often in here too, so I'm hoping they start breeding soon just to get a nice natural population of algae eaters in here. More than likely, I'm going to continue to just keep adding snails. This is the ugly phase of a tank. I got through my initial cycle by adding some fish and some corals and starting to see coralline algae growing, which of course, in this section of the tank here, there is a lot of coralline algae starting to pop up. I've got lots of pencil eraser sized coralline dots all over the bottom, and a lot of the rocks in the bottom, and I'm starting to see a little bit in the rock structure itself. There's still a lot of hair algae, but as the coralline sets in, I should start to see that hair algae start to taper off. Matter of fact, in the branching section of the tank, I've already seen the hair algae tend to start kind of going back. This was the first area where I started seeing very heavy hair algae growth, and also along the bottom here, and you can see some of this is actually cleared up a bit now, and I'm starting to get some other algae on it, and the hair algae hasn't been coming back, which is kind of what I expect to see, is that everything's going to have a huge bloom and it's going to start to slowly go back. And that's what my strategy with algae like this is. It is going to take time. It might have hair algae in the tank like this for another 6 or 8 months, and that's okay. It's not a problem. I'm going to continue to slowly add herbivores. I have not added any fish into this tank that can consume algae yet. That's going to be something I'll be doing in the next few months. But right now I just wanted to keep adding snails and urchins in, as they'll do a really good job to start taking care of the algae. So there is a lot of algae in here, but it is expected. And I tell anyone that's starting up a reef aquarium or any saltwater aquarium for that matter, don't get scared, don't get intimidated. It will pass. It takes some time, but it will pass, especially when you start with a lot of dry rock or rock you're reusing. you're going to have a lot of nutrients become available, and the algae is going to soak them up and use them, and then use your herbivores and manual removal to take care of it. And again, it takes time and patience, but before you know it, it'll all be out of here and it'll be filled up with some beautiful coralline algae. The next thing I wanted to cover today is combining the 4,200 gallon display with the 2,100 gallon fish room. Now, when I started the 4,200 gallon display, it was on a temporary 120 gallon HDPE sump with a Diablo 300 skimmer that I had put a J-Bow pump with a DIY needle wheel on it, along with a radiant heating coil, and really that was it. That was running the 4,200 gallon display, no other mechanical filtration. I'd throw a bag of carbon in it here and there, and that was it. And really what I was looking for was a balance in water chemistry between the tanks. The alkalinity in this system when it was started was over 12, and the alkalinity in my fish room system was about 9, which was a little high in itself. I usually like to be more in the 8 range myself. It's my preference. But in this case, having such a substantially different alkalinity between the display tank and the fish room system, I had several people say, well, why don't you just combine them right away? Well, you really want to be careful with that, because the display tank in this case has 2/3 more water volume than the running system that's been running for 3 years. Now, the fish room has had its share of problems with likely metal poisoning that took over 2 years to kind of clear up. But that system has really been on the mend. The corals were doing well. Coralline algae was actually coming in and starting to grow, and the microfauna population has really been taken off. So I've been very happy with how the fish room has been running, and I want to be careful with combining in the new system with the fish room. Now, to start the process of combining, I did a series of water changes where I'd literally pump out the sump tank from this system into the running system in the fish room, which should probably be anywhere from 100 to 250 gallons would get pumped into that system. I'd let it run for a while, and then I would siphon water out of the fish room system back into the temporary sump, turn the pumps on, and kind of restart everything. And during this time, I had turned off my calcium reactor and my calc stir, and essentially the only dosing I was doing to the fish room system was adding water from the display because the alkalinity was so much higher. And what I started to see is that the fish room system tended to stay about level, and I started seeing the alkalinity start to slowly go down in the display. And I was looking to get them as close as I could to be a match before I combined the system. Now, I wanted to get the initial cycling out of this tank, get microfauna going, get algae going, get a few corals and fish in here, just to start establishing all of the ecosystem that is going to be necessary. It is going to take months, if not years, for this system to fully mature, depending on how you define that. But I wanted to start by just getting the water chemistry balanced, making sure that I had microfauna throughout the tank, started to see algae growth, and started to make sure that the animals that I was putting in here were doing okay and weren't having problems. And then I did those series of water changes over the course of 3 months. I could see that the DKH and alkalinity between the two systems was within 1. That was my trigger to say, okay, let's go ahead and combine the systems together. Now, the process to combine the two systems took a week and a half, and what I ended up doing first was I took one weekend and I completed my drain line plumbing from the union that I had further down the line close to the permanent sump system, and I ran that remainder of the plumbing, glued it all in, and essentially I had to go from a union fitting, kind of go up in an angle, add an air vent in, and then pipe the 4-inch drain line into the permanent sump. Now, one thing I want to make sure of is I wanted to use a gravity feed for my DIY protein skimmer from this display which meant that the 4-inch drain line had to be higher than the highest point I wanted water to be in the skimmer. So I had to plumb it up, and that involved me having to relocate my UV sterilizer. So I had to remove that plumbing. And once I plumbed all of that in, I went ahead and did a couple of tests with water changes between the display and the fish room system to test that plumbing out. I was satisfied there were no leaks. So then it was kind of wait till the next weekend when I had time. And at that point, what I needed to do was pump out all the water from the temporary sump, replumb the return lines to use the second return line in the tank and plumb that to the permanent sump. And then I needed to remove my temporary sump. Now my temporary 120 gallon HDPE sump was connected to the drain line system with the 4-inch line, and essentially what I did is I had a T with threads on it, and that threaded T is where I just made a little U-pipe come off for the 4-inch drain. Once I had all the water pumped out, I had to cut that plumbing and pump out the 4-inch drain line, and then get the threaded fitting off, which is going to get capped for a clean out access. So it took a little time to do that, and unfortunately, it doesn't go the way that I wanted it to, because the overflow box here, you just get a little trickle of water coming through it, and was constantly refilling that 4-inch line. Eventually I drained the overflow box out manually, and that allowed me to dry out the plumbing enough in the 4-inch line to where I could silicone my 4-inch cap on there for the eventual clean out. And then the plumbing was capped. Now after I glued everything and was working on it all day, I let the display tank here sit for several hours without having the main return back on. I wanted to give all the plumbing adequate time to get to dry. I couldn't wait 24 hours. It just wasn't possible with the return line plumbing. But in my experience, after a few hours are usually okay, but you have to be cautious about putting pressure and such onto lines like that. So after a few hours, I went ahead, flipped on the pump, and the systems were then combined. Now I've had to do a little bit of tweaking with the air venting into the drain lines. You might be able to pick it up on the camera. There's some little whooshing that happens here and there, and it's just because of how the air in this drain line is. Because it's a big U-trap essentially, you tend to get some air bubbles coming in and out, which is why it's so important for this particular drain system to have venting caps in all the high points to make sure air has an opportunity to get out and it doesn't get an airlock and possibly stop water that could cause a flood, which would be bad. But the combination of the systems worked really well. The tanks did tend to get cloudy for about a week after that. A lot of it had to do with the fact that I stirred up so much detritus in the sumps by putting in all the extra water flow of the Abyss A400 at 75%, going through there instead of just the regular Jabo 15,000 pump that's operating the reef tank in the fish room. Overall though, the combination of the systems went well. The chemistry balanced out nicely. Now there was phosphate and nitrate in the fish room system, but really not present here. And of course, combining that all together probably fueled a little bit of the algae growth too. As you can see, it's a lovely green hairy mat here, but it's going to get better in time. So that was a combination of the systems. The next thing I want to cover is some of the new hardware on the 4,200 gallon display. Now the first hardware that I want to cover today, which is new for the 4,200 gallon aquarium, is lighting. Now when I started this tank, I had just 4 used radions on it. Unfortunately, I'm down to 3 because one of them got ruined with condensation, and despite trying to take it apart and clean it, it just wouldn't work. And I needed more light. And for this aquarium being so large, I really wanted to start with LED light strips in this tank. You know, for the fish only section of the tank, I thought just having some good LED light bars is really all I need just to get the fish lit up. Also, you know, encourage algae growth for the fish as well. But really the idea here isn't to keep corals, it is for keeping fish. But I do want them to look nice and have a good color pop on them. So I've been looking at different LED light bars for the last few years while I've been building this tank, and one of the brands that really stood out to me were the Quanta bars. And I ended up getting a total of 4 Quanta Pros. These are the Reef Crest Spectrum, which is kind of equivocated to something like an AB plus setting in a Radion. So there's a little bit of a blue tinge to them, but it tends to be, it has a really nice balance of light to it. These lights are real simple. They're on and off, and I like that. They do make more of a daylight spectrum. They also have blue spectrums as well. But I really thought this would be a good balance here. I bought 4 of them. I put 2 over the fish only section of the tank and 2 over 1/3 of the reef tank. And you can see a little bit of a difference between the Radions and the Quantas, and then I'm not really worried about that because long term there's going to be other lights getting added in here. But I really say I'm very happy with the way these lights are working. They do just have passive cooling, so they do get warm themselves. But I haven't seen like a huge spike in temperature in the tank or anything. Everything's still running smooth there. But I gotta say, I'm very happy with the output of these lights. You know, I've got 2 of these over a 12-foot tank, and this tank is 6 feet wide. Now, the light does tend to kind of go out at an angle like this. However, I've noticed that these 2 lights here alone are lighting up the fish only section of the tank very nicely. I'm actually not that concerned that I don't have like ultra bright light covered, you know, side to side. Eventually, I think ideally having 2 strips on each side would be what I need. I do know I'm going to add a blue strip in at some point just to kind of ramp up the lights with timers in the morning, have a blue come on, then the daylights can kick on and I'll turn the blue off, and then in the evening I'll reverse it. And that is something I'm thinking of doing, but I don't know if I'm going to add more lights on this side of the tank, because the one benefit I've had is, while the fish are lit up really nice, is the algae on the glass. You know, I get a lot on the front glass here, and when I had the one Radion on here by itself, I was getting quite a bit of algae on the glass on either side of it. But with these Quanta bars, you know, them having this kind of, you know, 120-degree angle of light, or whatever the angle is here, is you get lighting throughout the tank and the fish look good, but on the sides of the tank, especially the 12-foot side over there, I'm not getting a lot of algae on the glass because it's not direct lighting. It's a little bit more of an indirect and a splash, because everything being a white interior in here reflects that light back in. And I gotta say, I'm pretty happy with that because it cuts down some of my maintenance. So I've had these lights for a little while now, and I gotta say, so far I'm real happy with them. It was easy to set up. They had some little hanging kits here, and this is a little bit of a temporary hanging solution for me as I try to get them on here quick. But it was really simple to set them up, and like I said, I just put them on some outdoor timers so they turn on and off in the morning. I know a lot of people like light controllers and everything, and you know, I might do something with an outlet controller at some point to stage these, especially in the reef section of the tank, if I add more of them in, because I'm really thinking at this point in my reef section of the tank, I might just add a few more Quanta bars and call it a day. But we'll see. That's the beauty of this tank, is it's a huge space and I can experiment with different kinds of lighting. But so far, so good with them. I'm happy. And you know, if you want to look at some other LED light strips out there, I would at least take a look at Quanta Pro lights. I'm not being sponsored or asked to do this at all. You know, I wanted to try them out, and so far I'm having a good experience with them. The next part of hardware I want to talk about for the 4,200 gallon aquarium is flow pumps. There are a lot of great commercial flow pumps out there. I've got Pantaray ECM42. I've also got an MP40 on this tank right now. But as I really love working with DIY, there were some different options I wanted to pursue in terms of flow for this aquarium. See if I could make something work. And I decided to go down the route of turning pressure pumps into propeller pumps. And that was one of the routes I've taken. I've actually been testing this particular pump here for just about a year with a DIY propeller that I 3D printed. And now that I'm satisfied that the propeller and the pump are holding up for about a year or so, I went ahead and 3D printed a cage, made a PVC holder, and have this pump in here. Right now it's in test mode, but the idea is to take a pressure pump. In this case, this is a platinum blue 85 watt pump, and I have removed the impeller, the volute, added the propeller, a cage to it, and a mount that are all 3D printed to turn it into a flow pump. Now why do this? Well, one, I just wanted to see if I could do it. I'm not worried about how this looks. I know it's not the most pretty thing in the world compared to the rest of the tank. However, flow is something that is essential for the corals, fish, and other animals that live in this ecosystem. So even if it doesn't look like the most sightly thing in here, it doesn't really matter to me. I care about my animals that I'm keeping here, and I want to keep them happy, healthy, and thriving. If it takes what someone might call a big ugly flow pump sitting in the tank, so be it. Now why did I choose a platinum blue pump? There's a lot of different pressure pumps out there. I use a lot of Jabos. I've got my Abyss. The reason I went with this platinum blue pump all is about this. This pressure pump has a built-in wave maker controller with it. Now it's basic. It's not anything real fancy, but it has pulse modes, it has ramp up and ramp down modes, which is what I'm on right now. And it's an 85 watt DC pump. So it is putting out some pretty good water flow. Now I've got another one of these pumps as well. It's a 115 watt platinum blue pump, which is on the other side of me here. It's covered in hair algae right now, as this one's starting to be, because it's just creating so much flow that it's sucking the algae in rather quickly. So they have to be cleaned fairly often. But this pump alone was churning up a 700-gallon tank with some pretty good flow for about a year. Moving it in here, I wanted to add it in for some supplementary flow in addition to what's going on in here. The 115 watt pump that is on the other side of me back there, that pump will push water and have a pretty heavy to moderate flow 12 feet away from where it is positioned. So I would expect something a little less with this pump, being it's a little lower wattage at 85 watts. But the whole idea for me remains the same. If I can 3D print and produce some high wattage pumps for a little bit more of a cost-effective means, and for me just trying out some DIY things that you can't get with commercial pumps. And this pump is even using a toroidal propeller design, which is something that's new and experimental, and they don't offer that type of propeller technology in any of the commercial pumps out there for aquariums that I've seen. It's all in boats, and more so in drones and some experimental aircraft as well. So it's something new I wanted to try, and that's the beauty of 3D printing. So I've got two of these pumps now. I've also got another one back here that I'm working on, which I'm not going to talk about, but I have another gyre pump that I'm trying to make out of an existing pump that I already have too. And once I get that running and tuned up a little bit more, I will talk about that. But that's something that I've been working on that I really have been enjoying with the hobby now that the aquarium's built, is working on DIY projects around things like water flow, because I think it's something that it's fun to experiment with for myself. I'm not looking to sell anything. I just want to build things for myself here, which I think is really a fun aspect of this hobby. So that's the new hardware that's in the tank, the Quanta Pro light bars, and some DIY flow pumps, which so far I've been very happy with the results of this pump. This one's only been here less than a day. I've already had to clean it once because it's kicking up so much water flow. It's getting clogged up with hair algae, but that will pass in time as I get the hair algae controlled with the cleanup crew and just the tank maturing. So really happy with this. I'm going to add more flow pumps and lighting to the tank here as time goes on, but I wanted to start off to just get this massive amount of water moving, and so far these bigger pumps have been doing a really nice job of it. I wanted to briefly talk about aquarium maintenance and what I'm doing for all my aquarium systems. I have 3 in total: the 6,300 gallon system, a 100-gallon system, and a 25-gallon system. Now, it's a lot of maintenance to do. I do not have a staff. I do all of this myself. I'm just one person doing the maintenance, which might seem like an overwhelming and insurmountable thing to do, but I really do enjoy maintaining my aquariums. And I wanted to just briefly talk about how I've been doing that maintenance and starting up this new aquarium system and kind of getting a new routine established. When it comes to my tanks, there's something I'm doing every day, multiple times a day, and that is just doing a walkthrough of my aquarium system, whether it be just looking at the display tanks, the fish room, or the filtration systems, and just making sure everything is okay. I do this walkthrough when I get up in the morning before I leave for work, or I start work, when I come home from work, or if I've been out for the day doing something. I'll always do a bit of a walkthrough of the fish room, the basement, look at my other tanks. Same thing when I'm about to go to bed. And really, I'm looking for any sights, sounds, or smells that are out of place. And it doesn't take long. It takes me under 2 minutes to walk through everything that I have and just make sure that it's okay. Good example, I was using F-Aptasia in my 400-gallon reef tank, and I turned off the return pump and put all the flow pumps off or into a feed mode. I applied the F-Aptasia to the Aptasia. You're supposed to wait 30 minutes, but for whatever reason, I forgot about putting the return pump back on along with a couple of the other pumps, although some of the flow pumps were just in feed mode. So I got up, went to the tanks the next morning. I noticed the sump level of water was higher than it was supposed to be. And that was an immediate thing for me to just go, something is not right. And I looked at the tanks. I saw my 400-gallon reef in the fish room had its water down and its return pump off. It's like, oh, turn it back on. So those quick little things happen. You know, it could be a spill, it could be a piece of equipment not working. It's just a good quick check, and you kind of get into a routine of looking at things, and that's something I do every single day. Beyond that, the maintenance is all broken up into different tanks. So I'll start with a small 25-gallon tank in my fish room, and it's real simple. Once a week or every 2 weeks, I'm doing a 5 to 10-gallon water change on the tank, and that's just to refresh elements. I am dosing all for reef in there with a doser in a very small quantity, but I like to do a water change every week or two on that tank. Very simple. There's no skimmer on it. I have a gravity-fed ATO in there with a 5-gallon water jug that once a week at least I'll go ahead and top that off, make sure it's nice and full. And usually once a week I'm testing alkalinity in the tank just to make sure it's staying in range. So real simple in there. Scrape the glass, remove some algae. There's a lot of red cotton candy algae in there. It's kind of taken over. I just remove it manually, and I've added a few more snails in there recently, but I was growing some macroalgae and also keeping a lot of different soft coral, so I wasn't really concerned about the algae. That's that little 25-gallon, real simple, not a lot of maintenance to it. The 100-gallon tank is where all my new fish come in as I'm going to be putting them in the system. And there's actually some fish in there now. I'll show in a little bit. But that tank, really, I just do water change once a month of 20 to 25 gallons. I will scrape the acrylic generally once a month or every 2 months. If there's new arrivals in there, I don't want to disturb them. I just want to give them a happy, healthy environment. So I tend to just let fish have their space. I don't care if the tank looks a little dirty. It's not a big deal. And usually once a week or so, I clean the protein skimmer out in there. This one's also in a gravity-fed ATO, so I just check that jug once a week and top it off. So pretty simple routine there. Now for the 4,200-gallon display and the fish room, taking care of 6,300 gallons of aquarium might sound very intimidating and difficult, but I'll be honest, once you kind of get things flowing and you get a maintenance routine on it, it's just a little bit more time than you could take on any other tank. I just split a little bit of work into every single day. So when it comes to maintenance on the aquarium system, one of the things I'm always doing is twice a week I'm clearing the protein skimmer. It's my big DIY protein skimmer. It's got a very large collection cup. I could let it go for a month or two probably without having to clean it, but I like to keep the skimmer clean primarily so it doesn't start to really smell bad. If I let it go for more than a week without cleaning it, when I clean the skimmer, it's going to stink up the whole house. My wife does not appreciate that, and I don't blame her. So I generally clean the skimmer twice a week, and that way I don't have to worry about a smell, and it keeps my maintenance routine nice and simple. As far as other maintenance I'm doing every week, I generally am scraping glass once to twice a week on different tanks. I'll rotate it around. Scraping glass on the 4,200-gallon display is not the most fun thing in the world. Do use a steel blade today on my flipper, and I will say this, I do not store my cleaning magnets or blades in the tank. They are washed with fresh water every time I use them. That steel blade, I always inspect it and make sure that when I run my fingers across it, there's no little burrs or catches or anything that could scratch your glass, because if you scrape your glass and you do scratch it, well, let's just put it this way, it's not easy and sometimes it's impossible to do anything about. So the best thing to do is just make sure that your cleaner is nice and safe. I've looked at some other magnet cleaners, and maybe down the road I'll give them a try. Some of the ceramic blades look really interesting. I've started cleaning all the visible sides of glass on the 4,200-gallon tank. It takes me about 30 minutes to scrape all the panels, and not the most fun job in the world, but it does need to get done, and it does make a big difference in viewing. So that's something that I'm going to continue to do every week or two in this tank. Water testing is something I'm also doing pretty heavily right now. Alkalinity consumption in this system is going up, and when I'm in that stage of a tank, I'm always really watching my alkalinity, so every day or two I am testing it. As I saw it was falling and almost into the range where I really wanted to start dosing, I preemptively started dosing. I'm dosing kalkwasser, so usually once or twice a week I'm adding a little bit more calc into the reactor and the stirrer fed off of my RODI reservoirs. And I'll just stir that up and add a little bit more in there, and I always make sure that the hose that's leading into the tank doesn't get clogged up, as that's happened to me a couple of times. Calcium reactor is just got water running through it right now, but when that goes online too, I'll just be doing visual checks of it every week, or every day. I'll just keep an eye on it, make sure things are going okay with it. I do monitor my apex, although generally only once a day or so, or maybe every few days I log into it and actually look. Most of my observation in the tank is just watching my animals, watching the fish, the corals, the other inverts, the algae, making sure I don't see anything out of place happening. And from a maintenance perspective, that's the general things. Cleaning out pumps, like right now, the hair algae is really bad. So I'm having to clean pumps a little bit more often. It's just the name of the game right now, and it's not a problem. It's just something that has to be done. Eventually, I will be able to pull that maintenance back a little more once I get out of the hair algae phase. But overall in maintenance, that's more or less what I'm doing. I'm feeding the fish a couple times a day, but I don't consider that maintenance or anything. I really enjoy doing that. It's part of the reason I have the aquarium. Well, that's the video today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have comments or questions, please go ahead and leave them down below. Try to get to them as best I can. And if you want to see more, go ahead, hit that subscribe button. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and I'll see you on the next video.